How was it working under the Trump administration? Did you get a lot of sleep?
It was a really busy time. Get out of detention now because, our client's gonna die.
Assault.
Yeah, definitely assault.
What about cursing on social media?
About that.
So if you can hold out, maybe you'll see the end of the Trump administration. Merhaba, bugünkü konuğumuz Trump döneminde federal savcılık yapmış olan ortaklarımızdan biri Enes Hajdarpasic. Onunla Trump döneminde federal savcıyken ve göçmenlik davalarına bakarken ne gibi bir değişiklikler gördü, nasıl bir süreç yaşadı ve ikinci Trump döneminde ne gibi benzerlikler olabilir, göçmenlik dosyası olanlar için ne gibi önerileri vardır, onları konuşacağız. Tabii kendisi Boşnak, ondan dolayı Türkçe bilmiyor. Herkes Enes dediğinde Türk müsün falan muhabbeti oluyor. Onun için şimdi artık İngilizceye geçeceğim. Türkçe altyazı olacak, oradan da takip edebilirsiniz. Hey, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. So I want to briefly talk about, a few things. One, your experience, as a federal prosecutor during the Trump administration, as well as what do you expect in the second term? Recommendations for people who have existing cases. Can you tell me a little bit about your history as a federal prosecutor?
Yeah, so I'll actually start even before that. I started off as a trial attorney for the Department of Homeland Security in 2016 when Trump was first elected. And then in 2018, I became a federal prosecutor in the District of New Jersey, and that's where I was defending federal agencies in federal court. And those were the times up until 2022 that I was in public service.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's start off with, what were you doing when you were a federal prosecutor? How was that, especially under the Trump years?
Yeah, so I was a federal prosecutor in the District of New Jersey, and there I represented all the federal agencies on immigration-related matters. So that's like USCIS, Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, and really anything that had to do with immigration, I was in charge of defending the agencies in federal court. And so that included, working directly with the agencies about their policies and evaluating, each case that would come in. And sometimes it would be individual cases or much larger class actions that are challenging like wide variety of different policies.
So what kind of individual cases would you see as a federal prosecutor, and what kind of class action cases?
Yeah, so the individual cases, there's three main types. One is mandamus cases, which are applications that are delayed for a long period of time. Really any sort of application that's unduly delayed. That's one type of application. Another one is Administrative Procedure Act cases. That is when someone is challenging a final agency decision. So someone, for example, applied for like a business type of visa, maybe an L1A or O visa. This is when someone wants to come on for a particular basis and it's been denied. Well, there's options to sue in federal court, and oftentimes individuals do sue and they say that the agency kind of exceeded its bounds, its regulations. That's another type of action. A third type of action is called habeas corpus. That's when a immigrant is detained or a non-citizen is detained here in the US and their detention is violating their rights. And it also has become unduly prolonged. And that was also a really big issue last time during the first Trump administration. So those are the three types of individual cases. Class actions, they can really vary a lot. And it's usually involving some sort of novel constitutional issue. So those are the types of class actions that we would see too.
Oh, nice. Okay. So how was it working under the Trump administration? Did you get a lot of sleep?
It was a really busy time. The big difference that we saw from previous administrations is that the first Trump administration was really aggressive about going out and detaining non-citizens. Under the first administration, that kind of discretion was largely gone. So whether a non-citizen had a criminal history or not, it didn't matter. They were being detained. And that led to detention facilities being really overwhelmed and a lot of cases. So that was one big thing. Another one was also the major policy changes that were going on. There was different policy changes as it relates to juveniles, as it relates to the detention of non-citizens. And that was really time consuming as well. It was also complicated by the fact that it was COVID at that time. And so you had all these non-citizens in detention who then couldn't get out, and there was COVID, and no one knew back in March 2020 exactly what it was, how bad it was going to be, how long it was going to be. So they started filing what's called TROs, temporary restraining orders, which is to go into court immediately, on a very, very short turnaround. Instead of waiting for a long time, you're telling the court there's an emergency. We need to get out of detention now because, our client's going to die if they don't get out. And we had hundreds of those as well. And that was definitely, when you talk about lack of sleep, that was definitely the time period that was the least amount of sleep.
Yeah. So a lot of people are wondering what kind of immigrants are, is the second Trump administration going to go after? What are your takes on that?
Yeah. So I think that really depends on what you mean by going after. If we can use the first Trump administration as any sort of indication, it's that there's going to be just kind of a large, wide dragnet on all non-citizens in one fashion or another. So it depends. If someone came across the border recently in the last few years, for example, they might have not been detained. That's going to change going forward. I imagine that anyone crossing the border in the next administration is going to be detained for a long time until they're able to get out via a bond hearing or something like that. So detentions are going to skyrocket for those who don't have pending claims. Now, if someone has application for asylum or some other form of relief pending, then I think the situation is a little bit different. They can't just be dragged into immigration detention for no reason, right? So if some of those individuals, though, have low-level criminal offenses and they haven't been detained, they might be.
What do you mean by low-level criminal offenses?
Yeah, so in immigration, it's really complicated, but basically, ICE has discretion if someone has a criminal history to detain them. Now, if that particular offense is something that subjects you to discretionary detention, meaning they may or may not detain you, then that's kind of what I would say is a low-level offense. With this current administration, unless it's a particularly severe crime that someone has committed or been convicted of, they might not be detained. But I think that going forward in the next administration, we're going to see a lot more of that. Even people being detained for low-level offenses.
Right. What about traffic tickets?
It depends on the nature of it. I don't think if you get a speeding ticket, that's not going to be anything.
Like a DUI?
Definitely DUIs, I think, is going to be deemed to be a danger.
Assault?
Yeah, definitely assault.
What about cursing on social media?
I doubt it. I doubt they would know anything about that. But the way it normally works is they might go out because they want to, for example, in this situation, they might want to arrest someone who has, a serious crime on their record, right? They might have had a previous criminal conviction or a pending arrest, but they're not in immigration detention. So they might know that this person is residing at X, Y, and Z location, right? In today, when an ICE officer gets there, they might just detain that one person. But what we saw in the first administration is that they come to detain that person, they're going to see who else is there. If there's anyone else undocumented, they're not going to just stop there. They'll probably just grab everyone who's there, whether you have that criminal history or not in this country.
Basically, what you're saying is that if you live with someone who's committed a crime and they have some sort of an immigration issue, you should move out.
We're not giving any legal advice to that extent, right?
Trump is planning on day one mass deportations. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's going to be extremely complicated and not as easy as the Trump campaign has tried to make it out to be over the last year or so of campaigning. Why? Well, because deportations take a lot of work and logistical kind of resources. So let's say someone's already here and they already have order of removal from an immigration court. Well, what ICE is going to have to do is pick that person up, detain them. When someone is detained, ICE can't just put them on a plane and take them to another country. They can't just drop them off in Jamaica or Turkey, Nigeria. No. They can't do that. They actually need to contact those countries and say, hey, we have one of your citizens. We need a travel document from you to allow this person to actually come and land and be let into your country.
Right.
And that takes a lot of ICE officers. That takes detention facility staff to house these people. Who's going to feed these people? So when you're talking about ramping it up by millions, I mean, that's going to take a lot of more staff, more resources. And so deportations by planes flying out and deporting someone, that's happening every day. But if it's going to increase by that much, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a long time. Things move very slowly in the government. That's not to say that there won't be some like radical attempts in the beginning, because we saw that the first time around with, for example, the travel ban. I anticipate there'll probably be things like that when it comes to the border and border security. But when you're talking about people within your communities being, rounded up and just put on a plane, those things take a little bit more time.
Right. Right. So if you're going to hold out, maybe you'll see the end of the Trump administration.
Well, also, this is why it's important to talk to an attorney, right? You need to know what your current status is and what your rights are in those situations.
Right.
Even if you have an order of removal, did you get that order of removal because you missed your court date and because you didn't get your court, notice? That might be an option for you to go back to the court and actually reopen your case.
So let's go one by one. What changes did you see in the business immigration world in during the Trump administration?
Yeah, noteworthy, I would say things really slowed down a lot on the business visa front. Processing times were really long, and I think there was more scrutiny with applications as well. That was the major effect that I think was felt in the business world.
Mm-hmm. And what about the family immigration world?
Family immigration, so we're talking about things like I-130s, marriage-based petitions, applications for green card. Those slow down considerably as well.
So what about asylum, right? If you have an affirmative asylum case, what should you expect?
I know a lot of people are concerned about that. I wouldn't be necessarily concerned about that. The good news, too, is that your affirmative asylum application is being handled by the local field office. And these are government workers who work through various administrations. They're not political appointees. They're not someone who just changes with kind of the winds, right? So there may be policy changes that affect how asylum applications are adjudicated, but I wouldn't expect like substantive changes. One of the things that I would say with affirmative asylum applications is really just be careful of how long your application has been pending. Because if you're, I would say, more than 4 years, you got to start thinking about a mandamus. And mandamus, we can get into that, but it's a complaint filed in federal court where you ask the federal judge to make USCIS hurry up and make a decision on your case because it's violating your rights. The delay is violating your rights.
Anyone who has an affirmative asylum case over 4 years, do you recommend that they file a mandamus claim?
I recommend that you seriously consider it and evaluate the risks. If your personal circumstances are such that it's causing severe harm to you, emotionally, psychologically, physically, right? It's affecting your job, your livelihood, these types of things. I would say seriously consider it because there's really no other option other than continuing to wait. And that wait, you have no idea how long it's going to be. You can file a mandamus whenever, but the issue is whether it's going to be successful or not. I would say the likelihood of a success on a mandamus increases with the length of time that an application has been pending. We've noticed that over 5 years, there's a much better likelihood that a case is going to be settled by USCIS.
Yeah. So what about those that came through the border? What are your recommendations for those people in the next 4 years?
Yeah, so those who have come across the border and they don't have what you say like an open case, they probably are not in immigration court. And so they're technically entered without permission most likely and are here undocumented. So one possibility is that they may be picked up, detained, and then issued a notice to appear in immigration court while they're detained. And their cases get expedited very quickly when they're detained. Now, if they don't have a criminal history, they're eligible to file for a bond hearing. But at a bond hearing, you got to show you're not at risk of flight, that you're not going to flee the country, and that you're not a danger to community. You're putting kind of your freedom in the hands of an immigration judge to determine that.
Right.
And if the immigration judge denies you your bond, or you can't meet the bond amount, then you're going to stay detained until your immigration court proceedings are done. They can still take months. Uh-huh. And during that period of time, you gotta actually prepare your case with, hopefully you have an attorney, but your case needs to be prepared during that time when you're detained. It makes it much, much more difficult than someone who's not detained. One of the things we're gonna see in the Trump administration is that the trial attorneys for Homeland Security are gonna be much more aggressive in immigration court.
So for those that don't have cases in the system, what do you recommend for them?
Definitely talk to an attorney to see what your options are.
Right.
You want to be able to know okay, have an attorney who's experienced, like we have a lot of experience in this realm, to look at your whole history holistically and say, this is what you're eligible for, but this is where also the obstacles are, and give you a really realistic picture of what to expect.
Okay. And what about those who already have an asylum case in the immigration courts?
What I expect is not much is going to change between now and January for sure. And then from January on, I would expect like serious changes start happening with immigration court and ICE attorneys 6 months to a year. You just have to be on top of your case, talking to your attorney, making sure that your attorneys have the full history of your case so that they're best prepared for these situations where the ICE attorneys might be more aggressive and the immigration judges are probably going to be under more pressure as well to complete cases and get them off their dockets. And that made the immigration judges a lot more aggressive about, hey, your case is being called up. Is it ready? Well, it's not ready. Well, too bad, right? So that's why you want to be ready for your individual hearing.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. And one last question. Did you vote for Trump?
We're not doing this.
You don't have to answer that. Eğer sorularınız olursa Enes Bey'e ulaşabilirsiniz veya bizim ofise ulaşabilirsiniz. Thank you, Enes, for your wonderful wisdom and insight today. Really appreciate it.